Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this episode is very important, especially for developing world, reduce inequality. As a researcher, I do a lot of research for gender inequalities. Besides that,
Yeah.
in developing nation, there are a lot of inequality. Uh, Reducing inequality, I believe that there are different
Um,
successful model from Europe, from North America.
so
So
it
we
was
have our world famous
Benjamin
uh,
Dinkins.
world famous speakers, Professor Edward, Professor David Smith, Professor Dave, Professor Ching, and Mr. Adam. So we will discuss on that particular point, and I'm sure our audience will learn a lot of things from our speakers. Professor Edward, what you want to add for today's discussion?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone in the Asian Pacific area. And today in the United States, we're celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday. And he was the great civil rights leader in this country. He was unfortunately assassinated in 1968, but he was one of the really, truly heroic individuals who sought equality. Because in this country, of course, slavery was abolished in 1865, but inequalities under the law continued. And King was one of the great pioneers. And so this is a very appropriate day that we're having this discussion on Martin Luther King's birthday. But the word equality is kind of a confusing word sometimes. Equality before the law is, of course, a principle premise of any free society, meaning that governments cannot abuse you. Governments cannot say, well, you're black, and so we're going to treat you differently before the law. You're white, we're going to treat you better, or you're Asian, or whatever, you're Jewish, doesn't matter. Equality before the law is a fundamental principle of any free, just society. The concept of economic equality is much more problematic because you have equality defined in two different ways. One is equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. And this is very tightly connected to a second issue, and that is how do you get wealthy? Equality of outcome simply means, well, it doesn't matter what you do, everyone should be more or less equal. And to me, this is wrong. It's equality of opportunity that should be most important. That is, everyone has the same liberty to act for their own self-interest. And I want to mention a couple of things here. For example, there's a thing called the Gini Index, which is GINI. And what it does is it measures the difference between the wealthiest individuals and the poorest individuals in any given country. And the Gini Index, for example, shows right now that South Africa is absolutely the worst. There's a big difference in this index between the richest and the poorest. Namibia is another country that doesn't do very well, and you can go down the list. However, in terms of the countries that do best, you have countries like Ukraine, you have countries like Belarus, you have countries like Moldavia. You have countries that are actually fairly poor. But I think it was Margaret Thatcher or Winston Churchill, maybe it was Matt Thatcher, echoing Winston Churchill, who was talking about whether you're sharing in the wealth or whether you're sharing in the poverty. And so, to me, economic equality as such, is not the important measure. It's wealth. For example, would you rather be a poor person in the United States, or would you rather be a middle-class person in Moldavia or Belarus or Ukraine or some places like that are much more equal? The issue isn't equality. The issue is wealth, and specifically opportunities. If you take a look at the world over the last even 20 or 30 years, certainly since the breakup of the Soviet Union, you find that countries that are in the middle range on economic equality are actually the best countries to live in, the ones that have prospered the most. You take a look at South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, or Hong Kong. And by the way, Malaysia now falls into this category. Malaysia's had incredible progress economically in the last, say, 2 or 3 decades. And so whether they're sort of in the middle range in terms of equal wealth, but they're actually doing pretty well. Now, I mentioned the other issue is how you get that wealth. If the richest people are rich because they are Jeff Bezos and because they created literally trillions of dollars in new economic value and wealth, and they get maybe 100 billion of that $1 trillion, well, that's absolutely fine. That's exactly what we want. If you are wealthy because you get government privileges and contracts and so forth at the expense of your competitors, in other words, corruption, that is the bad stuff. And that's what you see, for example, in a lot of the African countries. I was just looking at the Gini list here, and a lot of them are characterized by lack of economic liberty and especially corruption. So people are getting wealthy not because they're producing lots of goods and services and lots of people can benefit. They're getting wealthy because essentially they have special economic privileges. People are not equal before the law, and that's the thing. So the issue should be not equality as such, but it should be these issues about, do you have the equal opportunity, and how did you get the wealth? I'll just make two more quick points here and then yield the floor to my colleagues. Right where I live in, it's called Montgomery County, Maryland. It's a very prosperous county, and our schools are pretty good here. Some of them are not very good in this county. But what's interesting is in Baltimore City, the schools are absolutely atrocious. They're absolutely terrible, bottom rung, dangerous places. Yet, in terms of inputs, Baltimore City and Montgomery County spend about the same amount per pupil. So a lot of times you'll hear equality discussed in terms of equal inputs. But even there, it's not just the inputs. There are other issues involved. You've probably heard me in previous broadcasts talking about how 15 years ago, nobody had one of these. If you're listening on just audio, it's a smartphone. No one had smartphones. Now something like 87% of American adults have smartphones. One estimate is that if you wanted to put everything in a smartphone that a smartphone has 40 years ago, it would be about $100 million worth of value. So in other words, even the poorest person in the United States has $100 million in assets literally in their pocket. Okay. So the point is that it's economic liberty, and it's the production of wealth, and it's equality of the entrepreneurs, equality of the talent that I'm speaking to right now. It's your freedom that's going to make your country wealthy, and where equality is not going to be the biggest issue because everyone's going to be more prosperous. And so if someone's 10 times more prosperous than this person, well, yeah, we're all doing pretty well. So anyway, those are my opening remarks.
Thank you, Professor Edward, for your excellent analysis. Professor David Smith, what you want to add for today's dialogue?
I love the way Edward got us into it and introduced us to the topic, because there's so many reasons for this. And as we look at the inequality, it's in health, it's in social relationships, human capital, economic progress, sustainable economies, and a lot more. But some of the places we need to look at it is it goes beyond that as we look at. There's also political inequalities that hit there. But if I was trying to begin to put this in a framework, and if I want to measure between groups, within communities, regions, countries, you also have to look at it as vertical inequality, which refers to the differences between individuals within a country, region, or a whole. But then you have horizontal inequalities, which are the difference between cultural defined groups within society. For example, between the rural and the urban population, and between different ethics groups. And as we begin to really get in and understand what we mean by how to reduce inequalities, you have to begin to put those multiple filters on it, because the horizontal and vertical ones, even within the same country, can be dramatically different there. And if I just aggregate the numbers, you often miss it. I mean, Edward was talking about the proliferation of smart devices. And Edward, I no longer call them smartphones because the phone is the minor part of its use today. But the mobile devices, there is actually a big disparity when I look at the horizontal inequality. You do not see as many smart devices in the rural audiences. You do not see the type of bandwidth that it requires to use the new ones in rural communities. If I begin to look through racial differences, you see pretty big differences in smart device usage in the different races too. And what's kind of interesting is one of the places where smartphone smart device usage is inversely proportional to some of the inequalities is in the monetary one. Uh, the people who have lower incomes seem to be the ones who always have the smart devices. But when you get to the top percentages of the income, many of them do not have the smart devices and stuff. So you see that too. And as you begin to look at inequality, the numbers can really give you some real interesting distinctions that are not apparent without looking at other elements of it. Um, just a couple of more thoughts as you begin to look at them. Uh, you know, in many parts of the world, inequality is really a major concern. And you see it particularly on the horizontal inequality because you see it including gender inequality very big, which increases the risk of violent conflict. And where violence and conflict can worsen, it becomes a threat then of inequality to democracy, social cohesiveness, to resilient societies, and even the inequality affects the movement to become more green and to become more green sustainable as you look at those. So yeah, you know, reducing inequality is great as you begin to look at that, but you have to look at it through all these different filters too to get a complete picture. So Sharif, that's my opening.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Professor Dave, because you have engagement with Asia Pacific, I have some cultural questions to you. Maybe you understand more about the cultural integrations. Reduce inequality. There are many things. Some points we say that there are social system. That's why we cannot reduce inequality. On the other hand, there is another views like it's completely depends on the person, the man and woman. They have to take initiative. Initiative can help them to grow economically as well as they can reduce the inequality. What do you think? Which one is perfect? It's a social problem, social system problem, or it's a personal problem?
You're asking whom?
Professor Dev.
Oh, me. Okay. I think it's a combination of both. I think that you can't divorce the economic from the social. I've lived in many countries, and I've found that quite often the people who are the happiest are not the people at the top politically, nor the people at the top economically, but the people who have found a way to balance their life. So to me, there's a gross national happiness that has more to do with how people get along with each other and how they feel about themselves. That's more important than how much money they're making. And when they say money can't buy happiness, it's true up to a certain extent. I think they find also that if you don't, have enough to get by, then you certainly are not going to be happy. So there has to be a balance, and the only way that we can achieve that balance in our modern technocratic societies is through an appropriate mechanism for making sure that people don't become disgustingly wealthy, so wealthy that they are beyond the pale at the expense of people who have nothing. So that's the problem. Oops, sorry, I have to turn off my device. And so they have found that it's not directly proportional, that as you get richer, you don't get happier. There's a scale that you have to take into consideration. And as you get poorer, you don't get unhappier. But it's people looking at each other and going, oh, they've got more than me. I don't have enough. That makes the problem. So we have to, it's constantly balancing those two things between what people feel inside and what they are objectively receiving in terms of goods and services and so forth. So government does have a role to play in that. Taxation has been helpful in making sure that people who don't have much or anything are given opportunity, or in some cases given goods and services, and those who have made huge amounts of money, not necessarily doing the things that help the society to get better, to get richer. There's an awful lot of money that is made on money that is simply investment to grow on other people's labor and other people's work. And so we have to always balance that out. Otherwise, the rich would constantly get incredibly rich. There are people I understand in this world who have enough money that they can shoot rockets up into space for tourist purposes, and take some of the resources that belong to all of us and just blow them into smithereens, adding to the warming of the planet, and not helping in any sense to give us more resources or a better life. So things like space tourism look awful to the rest of the world and to a lot of people in this country as well. What would be better is to have a walking tour of the mountainous regions of the United States. Send the rich people on a walking tour of the mountainous regions of the United States and let them sweat it out. It's better for your heart, better for your health, and better for the planet than expending all of this carbon fuel in order to send somebody up for a 3-minute or 4-minute visit that doesn't even get to space. They then call a space tour. It never made it to space. So we've got to, as a society, we've got to figure what do we value. I've lived in countries where people were much more equal and happy, and countries where they were very unequal and quite unhappy. So a lot of our appreciation of the world and appreciation of each other comes from understanding that we are equal and that we can get along because nobody is overly wealthy. I've lived in countries where you cannot trust your neighbor because you have to build a huge wall between yourself and your neighbor in order to keep your neighbor out. And I've lived in countries where everybody gets along really well. So that's the human dilemma, is trying to sort those two things out. And from my point of view, we aren't always in that. We're constantly in that, trying to figure out as a society what's fair. And fairness is not dictated by the free market. Fairness is dictated by people getting together, discussing what is fair, and then figuring out how to redistribute opportunity and redistribute wealth once it's attained. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam Durgadas, she is our woman representative as well as world-class leaders from India. I want to take one question from audience. How does inequality affect people's lives?
To all of you on this panel. As usual, you put together such a wonderful and experienced group of people. I feel pretty small and quite insignificant in the bigger scheme of things. But I'll try to share my point of view, and hopefully it resonates with what most of you are talking about. I heard Edward speak a little bit about technology playing a part. And I also heard Dave talk a little bit about how money doesn't make everything okay. And I think coming from an Indian perspective, which I always do, even though I have lived in America for over 25 years, I very much speak the Indian um, context, because I think that it's important to bring the Indian context into our conversations, especially at these kind of platforms. And the Indian context in itself is quite a very interesting and a very complex context when you talk about inequality. Inequality in India, even though there are several kinds of inequalities, right? And I believe 10 in the SDG 10 goals that need to be sorted out, or at least accomplished over the next several years. In the Indian context, inequality comes primarily from caste system. And it is interesting because even though we say today that the caste system does not exist, it is still, in my opinion, very, very prevalent, but very subtly so. It's all the undercurrents that exist. And this is very true in, I believe, a lot of Asian countries where, you know, where we did have some form of a system of caste, where there were the rulers, there were the people who fought the battles, the advisors, or the educated advisors, or the priests. And then, of course, we had the business people, and then we had the so-called servant class, or the servitude. So we had these different class systems, and it is prevalent everywhere: China, Japan, Malaysia, in all of the Asian countries. It's been there for several 100,000 years. And much as we say we don't have that today, it is still very a silent, subtle force that continues to exist. So I think that is the primary, force that we need, inequality that we need to address, at least from an Indian point of view. When you talk about people's lives, technology, of course, makes a difference, like Edward said, and I completely agree, having come from the valley myself. But technology, while it has become very prevalent and has become ubiquitous in India, I mean, even the poorest of poor have a cell phone. And I completely agree with him that it's made this communication, the accessibility to information, available to everyone. But while we think that that has made, technology has created an even platform, on the flip side, the same technology has created a very uneven platform, because there are those who use technology to create even far greater wealth, and those who use it only for information collection or dissemination. They don't know how to do business with it. They don't know how to utilize it to make money. They are simply accessing their bank accounts, making phone calls to each other, and sharing text messages or WhatsApp messages, if at all, today. So, on one side, technology has prevailed so ubiquitously in India, where and we are 1.3 billion people and going strong. It doesn't seem to be ending anywhere soon. We use technology, and it has made sure that there is a lot of accessibility to those so-called 400 small cities, that are what we call the B towns in India, that are now accessing information, not just from India but from all over the world. They access entertainment on their phones, but there is still that wide divide, because the few and far between that use technology to drive business are using it very differently from those others who use technology. Money, of course, doesn't make everyone happy, and in India, this is a several thousand year story. We come from a land of philosophers, a land of meditation, a land of yoga, where we say to find peace, one doesn't need money. To find happiness, one doesn't need money. Most of those who found the ultimate truth through yogic practices or spiritual attempts or meditation did so with no food and no clothes, sitting under a tree, right? So we completely understand the philosophy of that. But having said that, the same technology which allowed people to communicate and to get access to information has made this vast population drive westward in search of this so-called euphoria of material wealth, entertainment, news content, and it has driven them away from the core fundamentals of what this philosophy and this culture is about. So there is a lot of unhappiness, unfortunately, because of technology. And whilst we still learn to live without a lot of money, Indians, as I see, constantly are able to live with and without money. If you go to any of the villages, and we have several thousands of those, when you go to those villages, you will find people very happy with very little. And there are the same equal amount of population in the cities who have so much and who are equally unhappy.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure whether we have found that balance of whether to have enough money or not enough money. And I don't think technology is going to help it, because more access to information, more access to Western world and the material world is only going to take them further and further away from their cultural roots, which is about finding happiness in oneself. So, inequality, in my opinion, from an Indian context, is not something that is easily solved, and it is too big a population to, wave a wand and say it's done. This is a 1,000-year future that needs to be worked on. Um, unless something divine happens, unless the sky falls down, unless there's a major catastrophe in the world which shakes all of us up, almost like the pandemic, which made sure that people realize that money is not going to save your life, right? You don't need to be rich to be saved, and you can be poor and be alive. I think that kind of catastrophe, that kind of dramatic world changing moment has to happen for us to understand what to set the balance of inequality, especially in India, and I'm sure all over the world. Those are my remarks, Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Durgadash. It's really, really great point of view from your side. Yeah. Professor Ching, I know you are a dancing expert, you are a scholar. What you want to add for today? Because,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
yes,
yeah. I think we are the top in happiness, inequality. Okay. Yeah, that, I like that happiness, quotient. Anyway, we just published a paper on decision making based on rate of return on innovate on investment. Okay, this is a solution of value. Okay, solution of value belong to the age of social science, which is 500 years ahead of current age of science. So we will not be able to solve the problem of inequality. But let's see what is the root cause of inequality today. Okay, some people mention technology. That's right. The root cause today is automation. Okay, why are all these billionaires become so rich? Because they are very close to complete automation. You see, pole science has already solved the problem of complete automation. So we know that automation is the key to wealth in the future. And the situation will become worse because today we only have partial automation. Okay, in the future we have complete automation. Okay, I invent the universal permanent money. I invent the basic money, which is in the age of life science, which is 1,000 years from now. Okay, it make me, if it's implemented, it make me the richest person in the world. Not only that, when we enter into the age of life science, all this innovation will be completely automated, and they will produce so much wealth. Today all this partially automated innovation is not it just kid stuff. It's not worth mentioning. So basically, I'm saying the problem inequality. I would probably change the problem inequality to the problem of universal basic income. Okay, if everybody get enough necessity of life, most people wouldn't care about somebody get extremely rich. So we need to solve this universal basic income problem. And today, they do part of it. It's not a complete universal basic income. They have money just sent to everybody in the U.S. Everyone received $2,400 to get over the pandemic. But on one hand, you give basic income to people. On the other hand, you need to find a way to increase good investment, good return, to balance the free money you give out. Okay, there's a good reason for giving out UBI. That is, the first dollar is much more valuable than the last dollar. In other words, poor people find money much worth much more. Okay, so it's a social concern. This is good. Okay, also the poor people will just spend the money. That is also good to keep the economy circulating. So the government knows a little bit of that, but they don't know how to invest in high rate of return. Okay, we just published this paper, okay, on rate of return. Okay, now they have no excuse. Okay, this paper it's the key to going into age of social science, and also in solving your problem of inequality. Okay, and my feeling is we have to work on the problem of knowledge. Okay, our group is always working on changing from the money-oriented society to knowledge-oriented society. Okay, one of my mentor, Milton Friedman, has changed from political-oriented society to money-oriented society. So you want the middle class to dominate the economy. And we want to change the money-oriented to knowledge-oriented. And this money-oriented society has one big problem. Everybody's thinking money is most important. Okay, I definitely don't believe that. Health, happiness, definitely more important. Okay. And the money, it's good. It defeats the politician. Okay, it take over the society by the middle class. But since everybody believe in this, in money, I would like to have equal time to say the society should start to trust knowledge. Okay, today, throughout history, society does not trust knowledge, especially the establishment. Establishment don't want the knowledge to change. Okay, the knowledge not changing, so I published this paper, and also I throw in something, just as a reminder of the seriousness of problem. I call this Qing paradox, my name, Qing paradox, which is the peer review process filters out the truly original innovations which should have no peer. Okay, it's a paradox. Why do you use peer review process? You should look into the future. Okay, this paper we probably is looking into the future, not backward. Okay, peer review process is looking backward. Okay, so technically I also add what can be calculated. If we can calculate price, we should not use the past data to derive the price. Okay, so this is the Qing paradox. Another, it's really an insult to all this publishing business, publishing or perish, all these things. Okay, it stifles innovation. This is the worst possible policy. Okay, peer review process. But the government doesn't have, as I say, the government or the society doesn't have this solution of value, and which belong to the age of social science. So nobody knows how to calculate the rate of return. Okay, now we provide this solution to calculate the rate of return. And we should, in the future, we should look forward, not looking backward. So this discussion, in my opinion, we should get into more practical things. Okay, there is an organization called the Kenzuk. Okay, which was founded several decades ago, but recently it started to come back again. Okay, this is an organization which tried to form alliance among 4 nations: Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Britain. Great Britain. Okay, so this is, in our opinion, we need some new world to start the new knowledge. Okay, United States caught in this freedom movement. Okay, with our solution value, it's opposite to freedom. It says all our behavior constraint. You cannot simultaneously name the price or the rate of return. You name the rate of return, we calculate the price for you. You name the price as in stocks, we calculate the rate of return for you. So it's a deterministic system. You cannot have freedom. Okay. In fact, every action we take, every food, every meal we take, we need to make decisions on. You see, all these are regulated by this solution value. Okay, we may not need to follow it because human beings have been created with great deal of tolerance, which is another subject on fuzzy logic. Okay, we talked about a few times before, which is more fundamental than the solution value. You see, so basically, I'm also as I said, our organization has proposed, has invented the universal permanent money. Okay, today there are many people who invent the cryptocurrency, but basically there's no money has been invented. Okay, only universal permanent money is gold. Okay, which is in limited supply. So we invented this thing based on the solution of complete automation. So it's very far away. It's 1,000 years away. But the people can start to, because they are using cryptocurrency.
Thank
they
you.
Can start to use.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. I think already we learned several times about fuzzy logic. We will.
Yeah.
You can take a class. We can invite you. We can invite you in our School of Talent Economy initiative. Thank you for your excellent analysis. I want to give chance my friend Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. Well, firstly, I think the current woke movement is hindering a lot of progress regarding reduction of inequality. Wokeism, unfortunately, has become so obnoxious and mean-spirited that it's driving people away and has become so much of a caricature that more and more people will groan and roll their eyes, even though there is a noble foundation, of course. If it didn't become so extreme, then more and more people would still be prepared to acknowledge the noble core around which there is this madness that masks and forms a barrier around serious conversations about it, serious and amicable discussion. It's very interesting to note that because of this highly charged zeitgeist where people feel they have to tread on eggshells, the pendulum has now swung completely the other way. It's the point where more and more young people of not only my age, my generation, but also people younger than me are joining the right, the center right, the far right, so on, which is a very compelling phenomenon. Of course, there are more left-wing young people still in comparison, but nevertheless, the numbers of disillusioned young people defecting to the right has increased, and same with atheism too. Actually, there's been a resurgence in spirituality among young people. So granted, regarding young people, many of them started off as leftists, but then they switched to the right after unpleasant experiences with the modern zeitgeist and being on the receiving end of some vicious cultural and social engineering, of which there is an abundance, I think. It's never been easier to bait two groups into becoming enemies and hating each other, where much of that social engineering is mobilized for political gain. Another thing that I think could also hinder genuine progress in equality is a lot of the language and terminology being used, which ties back in with what I said about social and cultural engineering, as well as propaganda and public relations pioneered by people such as Edward Bernays. So terminology and also contradictions and oxymorons. Within and throughout the Anglosphere in particular, we see buzzwords and phrases like equality and diversity thrown around liberally. And to me, that is a contradiction. In my mind, equality and diversity are two opposing ideas. And again, the contemporary trans movement is fueled by a lot of slogans about being yourself, be you, be what you are on the inside, which again contradicts going down the avenue of gender reassignment, where a whole multitude of changes, some of them irreversible, born from people's unhappiness with themselves, who are riddled with much dissatisfaction with the aspect of themselves which they really want to change. And the third example of such contradictions is take a left-wing maxim like no borders, no human is illegal, and so on, but we'll champion, and quite rightly so, champion Palestine, for example. But it's like with South Africa, which was mentioned earlier, you had members of the white Afrikaner community in desperate need of help and aid, and they were not acknowledged as part of the refugee crisis or plans of action to help the refugees, which is terrible. But as was touched upon earlier, people are focusing a lot on ethnic and racial discontent when a lot of society's divisions are born from disparities of wealth, which isn't acknowledged nearly as much, I don't think. So maybe there are only two classes fundamentally. You've got like a predator class and a prey class, or psychopaths at the top and the masses below being manipulated. So equality is a strange word, as Edward said earlier. It's a strange idea. Are any two things in the whole universe truly equal to each other? And I think a lot of people miss the point when it comes to wealth, luxury, materialism, money. Yes, it is true that we cannot take our money with us to the grave after we are dead. However, the motivation for many rich and super rich people to amass all of this wealth is so that they can pass it on to the next generation, and then the next, and one after that, and so on. So the acquisition of wealth is a very long-term strategy which transcends the lifespan and death of one person in order to consider the coming generations of the family. So that's what those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Adam. That is very good point, Professor Edward. We love to learn more about social, economic, and political view about these inequalities. Yes.
Well, yeah, well, this is it's good that you mentioned that, because my comments were going to be on the social, political, and economic issues. Adam, I really respect some of the things you said there. One of the things I'll add is that I think there's an artificial construct of left versus right division. I see it as basically the Enlightenment, which has been a project going on for 200-300 years. Started in the West, but it's something that's universal. It's in every, it's based on human nature. And so you have Enlightenment versus the pre-modern, which is, let's go back to the good old days, which weren't all that great in many ways. Certainly in the United States, we're celebrating Martin Luther King. And when I was a student, I was considered a conservative, liberal conservative, because I favored, getting rid of all the stupid discrimination, but I also favored free market. So what was I who knows? But I think of it as Enlightenment versus pre-modern, that is kind of looking back, often bigoted, often, a very narrow view, versus postmodern, which is kind of a lot of the degenerate woke, there's no such thing as, objective reality. Everything is narrative, and everything is basically group identity. Never mind what's in your mind, never mind about your moral character. It's, what the color of your skin is, which is absolutely antithetical to people like Martin Luther King. So I think that's the way to think about it, because in this country, we're seeing now a resurgence with people like Steven Pinker, who's considered a liberal in the American sense of a liberal, sort of on the left, versus what I call rational conservatives and libertarians, who basically saying, wait a minute, we're all, basically part of this Enlightenment project. We have our differences maybe on tax policy or little things like that. But I think that's the way, and especially for your audience in the Asia Pacific area, don't think about it as left and right. Think about it as a universal Enlightenment philosophy that's been going on and for hundreds of years now, versus kind of a pre-modern philosophy or cultural view versus a postmodern, which degenerate view. This, by the way, the comments on India, I think, were quite on the mark. You've heard me say that I've got two daughters who a couple of days ago just turned 11 years old, and I want my daughters to have every single opportunity, whatever it is they want to be. And that's just the mindset, I think, of an Enlightenment person. I'll make a couple of other points now on, for example, talking about rich people. Any society in which you can have a Jeff Bezos who starts off, as, sort of a regular person, and comes up with this idea. He gets money from his, maybe family and friends, and basically creates a multi-trillion-dollar industry. I think it's valued a little over $1 trillion now on the stock market, is absolutely incredible and should be celebrated. And the fact that he can take that money now and do something that NASA couldn't do and build rockets that are cheap. And by the way, Musk is doing, of course, a lot better in terms of putting people in orbit. This is to be celebrated. We have an era that's been going on for over 200 years. And for those of you in the Asian Pacific area, please pay attention to this economic point I'm going to make. We had exactly the same argument made 200 years ago. Well, machines are going to throw everybody out of work. We're going to have the masses who are going to be poverty-stricken and unemployed. And we're going to have a very small number of rich people. And then Marx said we're going to have a spontaneous revolution. That economic analysis was completely wrong. What happened was, as productivity increased with machines and technology, the value of labor increased. So now someone could trade their labor for more stuff. And that's how a middle class was created. It wasn't created by taking from the rich and giving to the poor, versus the very, very fundamental sort of baseline that we can talk about and have differences about. The problems that we have associated with wealth in most cases are the politicians. If you get a look at the countries that are doing worse, you find that it is because they have corrupt governments and the like. What we need is not a bunch of politicians figuring out how to take somebody else's money and give it away. What we need is a system in which politicians and rich people don't have the political power. If you take a look at the Fortune 500 in the United States, take a look 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and you'll see the changes. Companies that were untouchable, nobody's going to ever get rid of these companies. Now they're gone, or they're very, very weak compared to new companies, because you have that turnover happening all the time. I want to make one other important point, because on the cultural front, culture is indeed incredibly important. And as we heard the discussion about India and the caste system, again, we had a version of that in the United States with the racism, kind of a version of a caste system. And that's where you really have the culture of individualism as being so important. That is, we each have to think of ourselves as the entrepreneurs of our own lives. Okay. And we do have an unfortunate system where, or I should say, sorry, an unfortunate culture in many cases where, for example, in India, you do have a caste system. In other places, you do have different cultures. And that's where I think keeping your personal philosophy and your personal lifestyle, is fine. I'm half Italian, and there's certain things that Italians have in terms of their culture that I think are really cool, including the very nice cookies that I can make, if any of you are interested. But ultimately, the thing that unifies us is that we have a common view of our humanity, of the fact that we want to be the best that we can be as individuals. That means that somebody in rural areas of the United States, or in inner city Baltimore or St. Louis or Chicago or whatever, or in the poor places in Latin America or Asia, have to all look at this culture of achievement, the culture of self-betterment. I completely agree about happiness, by the way, but happiness is something, as the Buddhists would say, comes from inside. Technology is a tool, and it's an important tool. But again, if you want to take a look at what countries in the Asian Pacific area have gone from poverty to opportunity for the most people, it is places like South Korea compared to, look at North Korea, what a hellhole it is. Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia is doing fairly well. Vietnam is coming up very well now, by the way. It's doing a lot of interesting things. So think about it that way. I'll just make my final remark, since I started off by mentioning Martin Luther King. The United States is a country where people come from every other land. We have lots of immigrants. We have a Chinese immersion program in my elementary school here. I'm half Italian. My wife is, her mother was from Israel. We have lots of Hispanics. We have in this area, we have halal meat stores right next to kosher stores. So, we have all the cultures here. We have all, and it works very well. And so the point is, everyone has their own little culture, but we're kind of united in a process. Progress is a process. It's not going to come overnight. But that's the great thing about having a free system, is that we can all experiment. We can all keep our little bits of our culture that are really positive. We can borrow from other cultures. And again, I look at the American model. It's imperfect, but every system is imperfect. But we have the one is like I think it was Churchill who said democracy is the worst system except for all the others. We might not have a perfect culture, but we're trying to form a more perfect culture, and we're progressing all the time. And that's where I think technology is a great tool. So I'm going to have to sign off in a few minutes. But again, I appreciate this is a very good discussion. And thank you, Sharif, for your wonderful work.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Edward, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Professor David Smith.
Sharif, as Edward said, enjoy the discussion today. As we talk about how to reduce inequality, though, I think we need to look at a couple of additional elements that are in there, because if I go back and look at the Sustainable Development Goals to reduce inequality by 2030, it is not only based on income, sex, age, race, class, ethnicity, region, and opportunity, it's also based on disability as well. And that is one of them that gets often overlooked as you look at inequality. If I begin to look at that, you see it all over the place. We go down to my statistics. Well, if we look at it, the disability inequality is really great. And you see how it impacts people all over the place. For example, in developing nations, the children that are the poorest in the population are more than 3 times likely to die before their 5th birthday. If you look at social protection, that has been really significantly extended globally, yet persons with disabilities are up to 5 times more likely than average to incur catastrophic health expenses. If you look at the disability, up to 30% of the income inequalities due to inequalities within households where there is disability. Of the 1 billion population of people with disabilities in the world, about 80% live in developing countries. And 1 in 10 children is a child with a disability. And if only 28% of the persons with disabilities worldwide have access to disability benefits, and only 1% in low-income countries. So if I'm trying to address disabilities, it's a whole wide range of categories that we have to address. And disabilities is one of the big ones that we tend to overlook when we talk about disabilities and what we're trying to do with disabilities. So that's one of my really points on this, is that we see it everywhere and we see the abilities to it. And while in the last 100 years, we've made significant impacts on reducing inequality, there's still room to go, particularly as we look not just at the vertical inequality, but even more importantly at the horizontal inequality. So Sharif, I think that's kind of my remarks here.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Professor Dev, I know you are working with family. You are trying to develop some good guideline for family or for SDG. So what you want to add specifically for reduce inequality for social point of view? Can you unmute, please, Professor Dev?
Sorry. I love the discussion of disability because I have a severely disabled 53-year-old son who was not supposed to make it to the age of 3, and now he's 53. And one of the reasons that he has survived and thrived is because I have been free in this society to put a lot of energy into him that would have otherwise had to go into doing labor out in the world. And that the government has helped us tremendously by giving us nursing care and by paying for him to stay at home and be taken care of by his immediate family, not putting him into an institution. So that's a thank you to the government for having been helpful to give us an opportunity to take care of him in a way that we couldn't have done with our own resources. Every day he gets 10 hours of nursing care. Every day he gets to be free to be in his home instead of being locked up or stuck away in an institution. That's a really exciting development that only happened because uh, parents got political power and were able to get the government to focus some of its financial resources on helping us to take care of him. If we did not have that support, then every ounce of my time would be spent taking care of him. But thankfully, we have a distributive system that allows us to redistribute the wealth by a progressive tax system that allows those who are making the most to pay the most. Unfortunately, over the last few years, that's got whittled down. And now people making the most are not paying the most. They're dodging taxes as much as possible. And so that's definitely hampering our our equality, is the fact that those who have the most are often able to hire the best tax accountants to keep the most. And so we really do need to have a new look at the distribution of wealth within the United States and the distribution of income within the United States, those two things being very different. For instance, the idea that you can leave $1 trillion to your children tax-free doesn't make any sense. It makes sense to have a inheritance tax that is sizable and takes a good chunk of that money away and redistributes it, because people are just, unfortunately, naturally acquisitive and want to accumulate as much as possible, want to be rich as Midas. But everybody can't be rich as Midas. So Midas has got to pay his fair share. And that's what the government does through its taxation system. And although there may be some people who hate the government and dislike the government, it is a great equalizer in some instances and has to continue to be able to do that. In societies where there is no effective governance, there also is no effective equality. There's no way to rise to the top from the bottom. And I tell you, discrimination still exists in this country, in the United States. There's still an awful lot of people who have great ability, but haven't been able to express it because they've been held down because of their race. So I think that that's something we've got to work on constantly, is racial discrimination, ethnic discrimination, and now discrimination against immigrants. This is a land of immigrants. We should be celebrating immigrants. We should be welcoming immigrants. And instead, we're building walls. Makes no sense. Okay, well, that's it for today.
Thank you, Professor Dev. Professor Dev. Madam Durgadash, we want to know more about women in equality. Sorry, women in equality.
But I will talk about women and equality, inequality, for sure. But I want to quickly address what the topic was that was just going on, because it's a very interesting discussion. We have, it's a very utopian idea, right? But we have this kind of a utopian idea that has been experimented upon here in the south of India, in a place called Oroville. And we have 4,000 people from 150 countries or more who live with within their own system. And they came here, the government gave them some land, and they have a special visa by which they live. everyone can do contributes to the entire community. So it's a community based system, and everyone does what they're good at. If you're good at gardening, you grow a forest. If you're good at making medicine, you run the hospital, right? If you're good at teaching children, you run a school. And it's a community based system, and everybody gets an allowance from the community every month for their living expenses. And in the thousands of acres as they have been allowed to build their own home, and so they built their own home with their own two hands and effort. And they build very simple homes. They are not acquisitive by nature. They are all about green and environment and sustainability, and they contribute to the common good of the community. And there is no religion that is practiced. It is one common, if at all you want to call it a philosophy, it's a philosophy of putting one's effort, which is called karma yoga, into the common good of the community. It's a very utopian idea. It was started by a philosopher called Aurobindo, and consequently taken forward and run by a lady called Mother, whom we call Mother, but she came from Europe. And so we have mostly a lot of Europeans, Japanese, Chinese, some from some parts of Africa. Like I said, from about 130, 150 countries, 4,000 people living together in one community. Now, this kind of a utopian idea, I don't know if this can expand around, all over the world, but one of the visions of Mother was, if we can do it here, this will sprout and grow in different parts of the world. And people will build this community based living where people contribute to each other with one's effort, one's knowledge, and one's experience. And it is not about acquiring things and owning things, because nobody can own anything in Oroville. Everything is owned by Oroville. Everything is owned by this community system. So you don't own your house, you don't own your land, you don't own your business. All businesses are owned by Oroville. And of course, for the you can there are no, it doesn't restrict you from going outside and consulting or doing your profession or earning a little bit more money, but you come back and live the Orovillian life. So it's not about creating outside wealth and living a free life within Oroville. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring it up because we talked about equality of wealth and distribute, the sharing of wealth, and whether we should take from the rich to give to the poor, and all of these questions were going on. Now, obviously, the rich made it rich because they worked either hard at it or they were smart at it or whatever. And if the poor are not able to um, get enough support or opportunity to get there, then I understand we need to share. But if they've been given the opportunity and the support, but they choose to stay on the streets, then I believe then one shouldn't take it from the rich to give it to the poor. I mean, that kind of a system will only create more and more people who choose to live off the government and our social security, and not really pull their socks up and say, what is it I can do to move forward and survive? And this is very, very relevant and prevalent, and very visible in India. We see beggars on the streets, and believe it or not, some of these beggars are richer than us. They have more money in the bank than we have, right? But they choose to beg because it's easy money. And
Yes.
interestingly, many of these beggars are now controlled by the mafia. So they are sent out there to go beg, bring money back, and they're put on streets. They're given routes, the charts, locations, traffic signals, where to sit, what to collect. It's a very well run operation, a very well run business. So how do we then, Dave, to bring up to address the point you made, how do we differentiate between who is genuinely poor and needs help, and who is playing a game and who actually has money but just acting poor? We don't know. And so we need to kind of shake the system up a little bit before we decide to take from the rich and give to the poor, right? I mean, I kind of agree with Adam and David and even Edward before he left on this point. But coming specifically to your point, Sharif, I'll keep it brief because I know you're running out of time. Equality or inequality of with women, I think it's a very tricky topic, right? I am not a feminist by any standards. I'm probably a male chauvinist. I would If a man will open the car door for me, I'll say thank you very much. If he's willing to pay my bill and take care of me, I'm going to say thank you, my darling, wonderful. I am not going to say no, 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 let me go do it myself. You go do your thing. I go no, no. I'm not from there. I'm actually the opposite of a feminist. But having said that, I do believe women should be strong. Women should have confidence, self-confidence. After all, we create, we procreate, we bring life into this world. We are the ultimate power. We got to believe in this. And if you truly believe in that power, you will never feel unequal, right? You will actually, on that opposite, probably feel more than equal. You will feel a little superior in some form or manner. So you don't need to fight for something that you're already superior at, right? A man can't bring a child into the world. You can. So what is there to fight about? And if a man needs to be given a little bit of support and confidence to go out there and do his thing, I think we should support them. I mean, this for me is equality, right? So I think it's a little skewed when you say, women are put down and therefore they should be given this extra little bit here and a bit there, and they're not paid enough. And I find that all pretty archaic in my thinking. Women have the ability to earn as much as a man today. If they really truly are capable, they will do it. If they are capable of making sure they don't let their emotions come to the boardroom, I'm sure they will sit on many more boards. The fact is that women are what I call run with perception, which is feeling and emotion, and men run with perspective, which is using their analytical minds. So when you come into a business or into a boardroom, you might need a combination of perception and perspective. But if you run too much with perception, which is emotion, then you're not going to make good decision. And so therefore many women are mostly kept out of not just boardrooms. In India, we are kept out of funerals because we will go there and weep our hearts out. And we're supposed to let the soul go away in peace. And so they tell women, don't come to the funeral ground, right? Because you need to be a little strong, and it's a good time for the world, the soul to leave this earth and go to a higher and a better place. So, from my point of view, equality or inequality of women to me is a debate that I'm, very passionately male chauvinistic about, and I think it's a fair world. Everybody has equal rights to do what they need to do, and everyone can achieve the best. So I think we just need to support each other. We don't need to be make allowances for each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. This is really great discussions, and especially I'm also learning a lot from this dialogue. Even I do research on gender inequality. One of my PhD on gender inequalities and class ceiling factors is a major issues around the world, specifically in the corporate. There is no like too much of women CEO because of many issues. We can discuss these things later in other conference or any other open dialogue we can discuss, and we can bring many interesting points. But definitely how Madam Durgadash also thinking, this is also important perception for us. Maybe she can train more of our entrepreneurs through School of Talent Economy. Mr. Adam, what you want to add?
Thank you. I think that human beings and their opinions are far too complex to be pinned neatly on a straight line going from left wing to right wing, or a horseshoe shape, if you'd like. We are far too complex to be reduced to a point on a one-dimensional sliding scale. It's a useful tool for political gain and clandestine motivations, shall we say, but it's also easy to convince many ordinary people that they are somewhere on a line, when of course we are all too complex and self-contradictory for that, which is an aspect of human beings that I find is to our credit, actually. I also wanted to second what Edward said earlier, using Bezos as an example. It is something to be celebrated, the possibility of going from where he was before to where he is now, which is a life path that many others have undertaken, like Musk. It's not impossible, and that is something to be celebrated. And because of that, it was very frustrating for me to read or hear some of the criticism lobbed at people like that. I think Bezos in particular bore the brunt of it, and people were cracking jokes about his rocket and the shape of it, which was ridiculous. A funny trope at school was we are in the future, but we still don't have any jetpacks yet. And I think the adult grown-up version of that is we had a space race that finished. Many of the ideas were shut down and mothballed. Why aren't we doing like that, what they did in the 60s, 70s, and of course the 80s with the space shuttles, now that a few decades have passed and we have better tech at our fingertips, which is finally happening now after all that wondering and hoping we as humans will pick it up again. And now that we are, or now that Bezos, Musk, et al. Have done just that, it's a shame to see ordinary people try and shame them and mediocritize these amazing achievements. And furthermore, to some of the earlier points I made, the mission to reduce inequality has gone to an extreme degree where I feel moral and ethical revulsion, along with many others. For example, I mentioned trans earlier. Now teenagers and children, adolescents and pubescents are going down this path, which breaks my heart, really, to be frank, especially in light of the growing detransition movement, where a lot of these young people have, after a few years down the line, thought to themselves, oh God, what have I done? This was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But of course, many of the alterations are permanent for now, unfortunately. So people say nothing is sacred, and it certainly feels like that today. And one of the golden rules, in my opinion, is protect the children. Children are sacred alongside other things. I think morality is objective too. Morality is. I think what is good and what is evil is very clearly defined in an objective dichotomy. Morality is objective, I think. So children growing up with these normalized extremes and acting on it with parents and medical professionals being complicit is very troubling to me. So that's pushing people away. Like I said earlier, you have former left-wingers going over to the right, and on the other side, social media addicts being brainwashed effectively by platforms such as TikTok. So because of these incendiary social situations, inequality risks just becoming worse and worse. True inequality, that is, in my opinion.
Thank you. Professor Ching.
Yeah, okay. My conclusion is the most important point is that the purpose of education is to raise the cultural level of a person and the society. The way to raise cultural level is through knowledge or mass of reason. You see, this inequality is a problem in social science. To solve problem in social science, we need complete mathematical rigor, because social science problems involve infinity, which never arrived, and therefore not subject to empirical verification. Okay. We need to move into the age of social science in order to solve problems such as inequality. Currently, inequality is not as important as universal basic income. Okay, when people have universal basic income, they will feel okay, so what? Somebody get rich. And also that unlimited wealth will be generated in the age of life science with complete automation. Okay, we see this, in Pole Science Institute very clearly. People will get much, much richer than they are today. So with this wealth, universal basic income will be, easily achievable. So my views are pretty much looking into the future, not the past. The past record shows us that we have not been able to achieve equality. Okay, so the solution must be in the future, and we are trying to get people to enter into the future. And the paper we just published is on decision making. Another, we're claiming that nobody knows how to make decisions in the past, including the financial crisis. Okay, because our company participated in the financial crisis, and they only took half our solution, which is quantitative easing. They didn't take the other half, which is funding innovation. So we have high enough rate of return to balance the low rate of return on quantitative easing. So basically, we are for knowledge. That's my conclusion. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for this is really great discussions, and we believe that this kind of dialogue will be really helpful for the developing world. Madam Durga, I think a noise from your side. I'm sorry about that. Uh, I'm sorry about that. Okay. So basically, our target to solve different kind of social problem with the help of modern science, engineering, and technology. And I want to give thanks to all of our speakers, those who continuously support World Talent Economy Forum. Beside that, I want to give thanks different social media group. I know that many group, social media group, especially Transhumanist Party, social learning, Harvard Business Schools, uh, as well as many universities from around the world. They actually approve our content, and I believe that they have millions of audience from different groups. So I want to give those group, those who continuously support World Talent Economy Forum. Me and my team regularly share with them, and they help us, they support us. This is also very good, important, because our message must need to be explored around the world. And beside that, we are planning to move with a lot of research related activities. So those who are interested to join in our research team, already we are working with IEEE. So this year, December, we will organize conference on Nikola Tesla technologies with the help of IEEE. So you can publish your paper in IEEE. We are working with MDPI, so you can publish your papers with us. And beside that, a lot of research projects we are doing right now from our speakers, from our audience. Those who want to join in our team, you can join. And finally, actually, we are developing as a academy our plan to develop a full university for the developing worlds. So we need support. We need good like faculty, they can join in our teams. We need good researchers, they can join in our team. Even though the students, we can train the students, and side by side we are moving with the fundraising options, because now we have more than 1,000 students from around the world. So we need to support them, we need to help them. We are creating job opportunity for them. uh, Startup also very important part for us, but step by step, because now we have shortage of human resources and everything. But hopefully, with the help of all of our board of advisors, all of our friends, and all of our partners, we can solve this problem. So thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Dave, Professor Ching, Mr. Adam, and Madam Durga Das for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. I believe Madam Durga Das has an excellent projects in March. Hopefully, we can work together and successfully we can launch these projects. We are very much open for any kind of good projects. We are for talent economy. So we love to work with grassroots level people. So those who have a people from the grassroots level, we want to contribute. So already the Harvard Business School, they are collaborating with World Talent Economy Forums. They believe talent economy is a very important thing. We need to develop a sustainable peoples in these pandemic situations. So we are also doing research with them. So hopefully, with all of your support, we can make a very, very meaningful impact around the world. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.